Welcome in the next Frogeex Green Tech Talk. Today, we're going to talk about water scarcity and the solutions to it. So we have a wonderful spectrum of speakers, and it's my pleasure to welcome basically. I would start according to what we have as on the agenda as a plan. So it's a great pleasure to welcome Mr. Rudy Van Drie, and hopefully I pronounce it correctly. Rudy is a planning engineer in hydrology for the Central Coast Council in Australia. And Rudy is going to be sharing with us more about the hydrologic modeling methods and nature-based solutions that enable efficient water cycle management.
I'll keep this to a chat because quite a bit of change has occurred for me personally and in my working environment. So I'm actually no longer working for Central Coast Council directly. I'm providing advice more in a consulting role. So the very interesting project that they have running at the moment it's tied to a wetland rehabilitation project, and that wetland rehabilitation project was driven essentially because of the identification of urban stream syndrome. So urban stream syndrome is a result of urbanization where effectively the hydrologic cycle is changed in that the surface is changed because of impervious surfaces, of course. And then when it rains, you get a change in the hydrologic response. So essentially, the loss of infiltration results in higher runoff loads that occur more frequently. And of course, the total volume of runoff also increases. So that becomes quite critical for small events rather than bigger events. So the 100-year event, for example, doesn't really change that much per se, but the 3-month event now has a lot more water in its volume that is directed downstream. And downstream of this very large urban development, which is called Warnervale, there is a wetland, which is the largest freshwater wetland on the east coast of New South Wales in Australia. It's called Porters Creek Wetland. And through satellite imagery, there's been analysis that shows that the portions of the wetland are suffering from dieback, and we've had ecologists look at it and report that essentially this wetland no longer is functioning in its natural state, where periodically there are periods where it dries more than other periods. So effectively this wetland is now drowning, which sounds a bit odd, but yeah, this is just the change in the nature of the hydrologic cycle for that site. So the solution, which has varied over the last, I'd say almost 20 years, from some very large scale structural changes like attempting to regulate the water by putting in storages, but that was not a very cost-effective solution because the cost of physically building these storages is very expensive. And a project I was involved in many years ago in the 90s, which is and I presented a paper in Lyon at the Novatech conference about the role of trees. So this was a detention basin to slow the flow, but what we did back in 1992 was we planted this park with many trees. So there is now probably close to 100,000 trees in this park that were never there before. And over the last 25 years, the evidence would show that rather than a loss of storage volume because of tree trunks and the physical presence of the trees, the performance of this infrastructure has actually improved in many ways. And of course, this essentially is now what's been identified as nature-based solutions. So it's quite, as you'll know, it's been quite an extensive global phenomena that's taken off and has really started to gain a good foothold. So that project's ongoing, the Porters Creek wetland, and it's quite large. And of course, a very important aspect of that is monitoring. Very recently, as part of the revegetation strategy, there's also a monitoring strategy being put in place. As of April this year, I was actually dismissed, sacked from Central Coast Council for not being vaccinated, which is unfortunate. So I'm no longer working for them directly. And I've picked up a couple of projects, one very impressive and large project in Lombok, which is a climate change adaptation and sustainability project. And again, a lot of the aspects of a long-term project, which includes a lot of revegetation, is and of course reporting to global climate funds the progress and benefits of this particular project is the role of monitoring and how monitoring gets done and what type of monitoring. So we've looked initially quite intensely at using satellite remote sensing as a reporting mechanism, and we'll be looking at sensors and using lower terrestrial aircraft such as gyroplanes, which is, I guess you could almost call them as a very large drone, but they're not a drone, to pick up infrared and other frequency bands to do analysis on. And of course, many of these, a third project, which is a very interesting project in Bali, which is funded by quite a wealthy person, which is aimed at being the first sustainable city in Indonesia. And again, the focus is very, very strongly based on the water cycle and the role of the water cycle and energy efficiency and energy. So, for example, we're looking at using local hydropower from a nearby river, using local storage. So rainwater storage is actually not something that is used in a widespread manner in Indonesia currently. So we're looking at using rainwater and using vegetation also in a much broader sense in terms of using it for stormwater and flood control. So each of these projects, they have a vein of similarities, I guess, in that a very strong focus on water and a very strong focus on using nature and vegetation. So some of the modeling techniques that we're looking at is, of course, starting with traditional hydrologic models. I'm quite a fan of trying to look for and find open source models. So we're using a free and open source hydrologic model, and because it's open source, we can adapt some of the code to add some special features to look at the role of vegetation in all of this processes. Another model that was used in the Porters Creek wetland assessment, the W flow from Deltaras or in Delft, we found to be quite useful in that it can quite easily be adapted to, I guess, take into account various aspects of changing vegetation, including root depth and soil properties, which of course are all very important factors that are often overlooked in many other modeling platforms. In terms of the surface flooding aspect, another open source tool that we're utilizing is the Anuga Hydro model. So Anuga Hydro was developed by the Australian government after the 2004 tsunami. And it's a general fluid flow solver, a two-dimensional shallow water wave solver. But some of the really nice features it has is a flexible mesh, so a triangular flexible mesh. It runs in parallel and you can use rainfall on grid. So it's very good at being able to utilize it to model all sorts of surface flows from quite coarse hydrology. And I've written a few papers on using Anuga as a hydrologic model because the industry for quite some time was struggling with getting hydraulic models, 2D hydraulic models, to mimic hydrologic response. Whereas since using the Anuga model, we haven't really found that the hydrologic response varies very much from the hydrologic models. And in cases where there is a difference between the hydrologic model and the 2D model, often it's, well, nearly 99% of the case is that the hydrologic model hasn't taken into account the surface storage. So when both models have accounted for surface storage, then the hydrographs are almost identical. So I'm quite convinced that 2D hydraulic models, if they're coded well enough, can replicate a hydrologic response from catchments. And again, the beauty with this particular model, the Anuga model, is it has an ability to apply gridded rainfall. So we can apply radar rainfall or satellite rainfall as gridded rainfall directly, so a gridded time series, which is very good for getting a better spatial distribution, so a better description of the spatial distribution of the rainfall. So rather than just being reliant on your rain gauges, and there are now several companies, one's from the Netherlands, I can't remember their name, sorry, but who are now producing processed radar rainfall. So they will acquire the radar rain from the Met Bureau. And I do know the guy who wrote the algorithm. So a guy called Thomas Einfeld, who, if you've not heard his name, he really is the guru god of radar rainfall. He's been doing it a very long time. And his algorithms seem to produce quite good results in that the radar rainfall is able to closely replicate gauge data. So there's a nice synergy there. So again, yeah, these tools, being able to set up these models in an open source platform also makes it very easy to distribute and broaden the spectrum of other people using these models. So the projects here in Lombok and Bali, we are starting to work with some of the local universities. And again, having access to open source models, we're able to get students involved. So that more than likely there'll be a couple of PhDs involved at some stage to hopefully get much of this stuff monitored. Because one of the things I've found, I guess, in my career over the years is that with the advent of water quality issues and trying to find solutions for water quality issues, such as I think it's called SUDS in the UK, and in Australia it's called WSUD, WSUD, and I think in the US it's low impact development. So unfortunately, specifically in Australia, there's been very little monitoring data, or if there is monitoring data, not much of it is publicly available. And quite some years ago, I wrote a paper when I was working with Sydney Water about utilizing some sort of an online database to try and promote the idea of the industry, the water quality industry, having some sort of a repository for monitoring data so that other people could get access to monitoring data to broaden research and I guess to heighten and increase the speed at which we get better solutions. Because I know for a fact, with working with Central Coast Council, that many of their water quality infrastructure devices are not working as per their design. They've never met the design criteria, which is both disappointing, but also highlights that you've spent a lot of money to get a certain outcome and you've never reached that outcome. So I think a really, really important aspect of monitoring is trying to find a way to share that monitoring data and make it more widely available. So I think that sort of broadly covers what I've been doing and how I've been doing it. And as I said, I've got quite a few papers over the last few years that was from hydrologic models and water quality through to more and more onto 2D modeling and the role of 2D modeling. And then the last paper I presented, as I mentioned, was in Lyon in 2019. And that was essentially on this accidental nature-based solution that was designed and built in 1992. And of course, now with 25 or more years of, what is it now, almost 30 years of tree growth, you really walk into an environment that's totally man-made, looks absolutely totally natural. And of course, the benefits of the changes to the soil structure is very, very obvious.
Mhm.
The air temperature is also very, very, so on a hot day in Australia, if you're walking down the street in 40-degree heat and you walk through this park, there physically is a 10 or 12-degree temperature difference, so which is phenomenal. And so, of course, the people that live around this park have grown to love their park because it's given them so many benefits. Not just the fact that it's a cooler place on a hot day, but it's attracted wildlife back again. There's some beautiful plants and beautiful flowers, and so it's become the social benefits. They're huge, So I think as an industry and as a profession, we sort of need to embrace and broaden the perspective of what the outcome of our work is, and I'm really happy to see that there's been this quite strong fundamental shift back to identifying that nature knew how to do it all along. We've tried to impose these things and put in concrete drains to get rid of water, but in fact that's just created more problems.
Second speaker that it's my pleasure to welcome today in the call. Nice to see you again. Is Michael Stanley Galisdorfer, dialing in from the US. Michael is a global water strategist and associate of the Buffalo University, also advising companies and organizations on strategic approach regarding water management. So Michael is going to share with us a little bit about the global water market and strategy, especially now in the times of more impacts visible of climate change. And we're going to talk especially about the biggest threats and opportunities which are now available and more visible on the market, and especially are potentially interesting for businesses and communities to manage in the future.
What I intend to talk about right now, which is how a lot of the projects you mentioned, the factors you mentioned, the changes in water availability due to human modification of the land in our global hydrological cycle is impacting future of things like manufacturing, the things like social stability and order, which are critical to everything else that we do. So without further ado, I'll give you a very brief introduction to myself. I'm Dr. Michael Stanley Galisdorfer. What do I do? I work on water stuff. And what am I doing right now with respect to water? Well, I write. I like to write about water. I like to help people figure out water problems, any kind, whatever. I'm a generalist. And I'm also putting together a book for kids on water because people don't see water. A gentleman named Eric Wendt, I think, called it the invisible industry. And I'm also putting together a special session with my collaborators, Lauren Enright and Professor Indrani Powell of Columbia, at the fall 2022 meeting of the American Geophysical Union in Chicago. It's on water innovation and climate change adaptation. Those two things go hand in hand. We feel climate through water. So to begin, we've talked a bit about nature-based solutions. We've talked about the need to have accessible, transparent, and integral data that has high data integrity of whatever resolution you pick. Now, let's think first from a very, very high level. Let's think from the scale of the globe, okay? A picture of the globe. Let's just say, yep, the globe's warming up. What does that do to the atmosphere? Well, there's the tropics. We have the intertropical convergence zone where the ocean water evaporates. The tropics are expanding northward each year. The troposphere, the thickest, lowest layer of the atmosphere, is getting thicker each year and wetter. So that's causing havoc because we can't exactly predict when, for example, the typhoon is going to dump water on Taiwan anymore. And that's a problem because Taiwan has relied on reservoir storage for water during the dry season to keep all those fabs going. And we live in a world that is digital. It runs on silicon. And you can't do anything these days without a chip, right? And Taiwan makes the best in the world. Okay, so laying that down, that gives us a very pointed look at a specific problem in semiconductor manufacturing. Now, I want to also point out that we're building new fabs in the American Southwest, okay? So you've got companies investing there. Intel, I think, just put some money into a big fab in Arizona, and they're relying on groundwater. That's not going to work long term. It just isn't, because groundwater is a slowly renewable resource, but it's not truly sustainable. And that's a big issue if you want to maintain, a functioning economy that's going through a period of global transition, right? You got to have reliability, and water is the base of reliability. It was the first thing that we figured out, really, besides how to hang out together peacefully, right? So I want to touch briefly on part of my background too. I mean, I know nature-based solutions. I spent a long time in stream and ecosystem restoration. And one thing that's also impacting water availability is how we've deforested landscapes and essentially paved them over in many cases. We're creating these sort of thermal capacitors, which are cities. And if you look at really old stories, things like, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, why were they there? Because, okay, if you want to keep more water in your city and you want to keep it cooler, like Rudy kind of mentioned, you have to have plants, because those plants are going to absorb that water. And then when it evaporates, they're going to dissipate some of that heat energy as water vapor. Now, how does this all tie together? So I'm looking towards the future right now. I'm looking towards the future of water, the future of how we design our cities, and the future of how we get water. Well, we know that there are new technologies available. We know there are technologies available that can help us to create a reliable water supply. I mean, one that's been around for a bit is desalination. It has applications. For example, if you have a super intense atmospheric river dumping a lot of rain into a river, that's a lot of water you can harvest. You can harvest that more efficiently with, say, desalination at the river mouth. It's a good thing that can happen here and there. Then we've also got things like atmospheric water generation. And atmospheric water generation really provides an expanded envelope, an expanded operational envelope. Like, say you've got that fab in Arizona or wherever, because fabs are expensive. And plants are expensive. I mean, you're building cars, you're building anything for aerospace. You can't just pick up and leave. I mean, you dumped in $10 billion. That's a serious thing. But you also don't have access to groundwater, because it's probably run out by now. And you don't want to deplete it further, because that has other problems associated with it. So what do? Well, even in the driest places on Earth, like the Persian Gulf, Middle East, Dubai, there's seasonal water availability. And there's all these old aquifers, which are just kind of dry underground now. So you don't need to build new surface storage capacity. You don't need to build new reservoirs. You can just figure out how to actually capture that water from the air and pump it back into those aquifers so it doesn't evaporate. So there's so the future of cities, the future of water are really tied together, because let's face it, if we live in cities, we can optimize our environmental footprint. With reliable water, it buys us time to deal with other problems associated with climate change, like, increased methanogenesis in these thawing permafrost wetlands. It's like people act like it's a mystery. It's not. It's like, you give these bacteria a bunch of organic matter, you warm them up. Of course, they're going to dump out methane because it's anaerobic. It's not a mystery. So to kind of wrap back around, we see this picture of the Earth. We see the atmosphere getting warmer and wetter. We see rain moving towards the north. Well, what do? Well, nature-based solutions combined with technology, combined with models, powered, of course, by whatever kind of AI you pick, that's going to let us save effort and energy and pick better where we're going to live and how we're going to live. What does this all do for us? Let's go to Crazy World for a minute. I like to go into Crazy World because it's fun. All these technologies, this suite of integrated natural systems and digital technologies, plus an awareness of the importance of water, what that's going to do for us is it's going to give us a leg up on building sort of mesocosms, like these, like, ecologies in space. So if we can figure this out here on Earth, base is water, food, and energy, we can do it in space too. So sum it up, water's changing. Its abundance and distribution is not what it used to be. We can't really predict the same way as before. Even with the best models, we just don't know, but we are aware of it. This is going to impact manufacturing big, because you can't move these big expensive plants. So you got to find water from them in other ways. We have a few technologies, desal, atmospheric water generation. They work, they're proven, and we have this capacity in these old aquifers underground, which we can refill. So the future of our civilization really depends upon how well we put this big picture together and get our act together soon, because, there's a lot of people out there who are spouting misinformation, disinformation, and people just don't know the basic science. That's why I'm writing a book for kids about water, because you know what, as adults, we're just big kids. And if we make it fun, if we make it engaging, people will want the facts after that. So that's it. Water, cities in the future are tied together.
Water is certainly a segment that is extremely important for us. And we start cooperations. We started and we continue to build cooperations with various organizations in this segment, whether it's around. Next on the list of our speakers is joining Mr. Steve Kwast. Steve, warm welcome in this round. Steve is the president of Genesis Water Systems. It's a very progressive atmospheric water generation technology that Steve will be presenting to us, and he's going to also share more about, why we need atmospheric water generation, what's the role in the future water supply. So great pleasure to welcome you in this round, Steve, as well.
Right. So I'm calling you from NASDAQ in New York City right now. And I just want to compliment the former two speakers, because all of their ideas are true and right, and we're going to need them all as the human race designs a different relationship with water in order to be sustainable. What we provide to this conversation is a technological breakthrough where the founders of Genesis Systems brought together some of the greatest engineers that we could find in the world, from places like NASA and from Lincoln Labs, Sandia Labs, Livermore Labs, this network of engineers and scientists that all have this abiding desire to solve the water scarcity problem, or at least a part of it. And so they really looked to nature and said, how does Mother Nature provide water? And as we all know, since the beginning of humanity, we have always waited for it to rain to collect our water, whether that was out of the aquifers, the lakes, the rivers, and we all had to kind of live near water to make it happen. And then when it started becoming scarce, desal was the technology, but we know that will kill our oceans. It will kill our landfills with a cakey brine of heavy metals and salts, and the capital infrastructure to pipe that water inland is unaffordable. For people that are in poverty deep in the interior of India and Indonesia and Africa and Australia. Australia, I know you all know this, they're spending up to 30% of their federal money on just transportation of water from places where they can make it, and then inland to places that need it. Monsignor, California, right now, one of the richest cities in America, is trucking water, and there's no end in sight. So what our engineers did is they have of drawing water out of the air, not using air conditioning, where you'd cool the air down to the dew point to get the molecules of water out of the air, but a revolutionary micro ionic fluid. And these inventions actually came from the battery industry and from the pharmaceutical industry. The engineers just took this and put it together and patented it. And we now have a liquid sponge, if you will, that we can draw water out of the air at volume, meaning it scales at over 1,000 times more efficiently than air conditioning, which means we can produce a water generator that people can afford. Now, we've done a lot of the environmental studies on this, and India has done many of the environmental studies on this when they did their X Prize for atmospheric water generation a number of years ago, to make sure that this is sustainable. And what we found is Mother Nature in the ocean is a powerful engine at providing humidity in the air. But with global warming, with every increase in 1 degree Fahrenheit of temperature increase, you have 27.5 quadrillion gallons of water that now get held in the air, and it becomes a greenhouse gas of its own. So our generators draw water out of the air using a liquid technique that is very efficient. And then because it's dry, we can draw CO2 out of the air efficiently, because the number one driver of cost at drawing CO2 out of the air is drying the air first. We already do that to get the water. So we have 3 products right now, and we're at NASDAQ here because we are getting ready to commercialize this technology. We have machines running in different places around the country. We are selling them to the US military for military bases in the Asian Pacific region, Indo-Pacific region, in Africa, in the Middle East. We're selling them to FEMA and to cities in America, and pharmaceuticals, data centers that need water to cool their data centers. There's a number of customers that can afford it right now, but as we commercialize this and get the fabrication and manufacturing down to a price point, we have 3 products that we are bringing to market. One is for the household use. So if you need around 300 to 500 liters of water a day, I can sell you an air conditioning size unit, by 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. We call it the Water Cube Mini. That can provide you 300 to 500 liters a day for your home. If you need thousands of gallons a day for an apartment building, a hospital, emergency management, a data center, whatever, I can build you a machine that's about the size of a shipping container or half a shipping container that will give you thousands of liters a day. So anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 liters a day. And then we can build a fixed site. This scales up effectively, meaning that the more water we make, the lower cost per liter. So the large units we've modeled up to 100 million gallons a day. For places like Egypt, for example, Cairo, where the Ethiopians have dammed up the head of the Blue Nile, and Egypt is out of water. And so they want us to build 2 100 million gallon a day plants just north of Cairo, and start drawing all of this unwanted humidity that's now in the air. And to give people a feel for how much water is in the air at any one time, it's floating all around us. But our scientists at Stanford did the math on this. The amount of water that's hanging in the air right now around the globe, especially in the places where water scarcity is becoming more critical with climate change, that's the equator of the Earth or the beltway of the Earth. The water in the air is equivalent to every lake, every river, every stream, every aquifer on the planet, essentially all drinkable water that's accessible. It doesn't count the ice caps, but every drinkable water that's accessible times 76. So there is 76 times the amount of water in the air at any one time than there is of all the drinking water on the planet combined. And so to break that down for the individual, if you take a 10 meter by 10 meter by 10 meter cube around you, that is all the water you need to drink, bathe, water your plants, feed yourself, and do all the things that keep you healthy, prosperous, and secure. And so it's, when you fly over the ocean, you recognize that 70% of the Earth is covered in water. It is not a water scarcity problem, it is a water access problem. And our invention has allowed us to have a new source of water that is pure. In fact, it's twice distilled. As the water in the air jumps into this liquid osmotically and passively, it's one distillation. And when we release that water from the liquid, it's another distillation. And then depending on the customer, if it's for drinking, we mineralize it with the mineral pucks. That is easy and known, settled science. If it's for the military, they want electrolytes in it. We can make the water taste like Desante or Fuji or any flavor you like. But if we're selling it to chip manufacturers in Taiwan, they don't want any of that in it because they want that pure water. If we're selling it to hydrogen generators, they want it pure because they can extract the hydrogen from that water more affordably than any other water because they have to spend so much money to purify the water. If it's a pharmaceutical or surgical grade water, they don't want anything done to it. It's just the pure raw source of what we have. But this is back to the last speaker's point of manufacturing. Every manufactured piece of material that human beings make for other human beings has a water footprint. The shirt you're wearing, if it's a colored shirt, about 600 to 800 gallons of water to make. One avocado, 16 gallons. 1 gallon of Coca-Cola is 406 gallons of water. A cell phone, a mobile phone, 3,100 gallons of water. A car, 18,000 gallons of water. The bottom line is, as humanity grows beyond 8 billion people, and as we want to manufacture more things to make people productive, safe, healthy, and secure, we need more water. And there's no extra sources of water other than what we have. And that's why everybody has to mindfully be more responsible with that water, or do all of the things that were mentioned with regard to gathering the water we do have and using it responsibly. What we bring is a new source of water where, for example, Tampa, Florida is our headquarters. And the city of Tampa is getting ready to build a 20 million gallon a day Genesis Systems water plant to augment the Hillsborough River, because the Hillsborough River no longer has enough water for the population in Tampa and for all the manufacturing in Tampa. Coca-Cola has to shut down its plants in India because it's stealing groundwater from the farmers and the local villages. And they need water that is a source independent of groundwater. The Department of Agriculture and the Department of Interior in America wants to build a plant on the edge of the Rockies to recharge the Olalaga aquifer, which is the largest aquifer under Central America. That waters all of the breadbasket of America. California farmers want to build them in San Joaquin Valley, the fruit basket of the world, because as you take a look at the water deficit, that aquifer is going to collapse like the aquifer collapsed under Mexico City a number of years ago, and we'll never be able to store water underground again if we don't save these aquifers. It's like a bank account. We are drawing water out of these aquifers faster than Mother Nature replenishes, and eventually those bank accounts go empty and it collapses, and never again can we store water underground. And underground water storage is it's the perfect way of storing water and mineralizing it for healthy drinking. So this is Genesis Systems. This is a technology that's coming to the world as fast as we can commercialize. And that's why we're at NASDAQ today. And I can send you those pictures, but we are at NASDAQ today in consultation with our bankers and our investors to find the fastest way of getting this technology to every tribe in Africa, every city in the Middle East, every person suffering from water scarcity in Australia, Indonesia, Malaysia, China. I mean, every human being is equally valuable, and there's a lot of people that need water. Sudan, South Africa, the list goes on. So thank you for letting me present our technology and our company, and I look forward to providing this water to all of you as a part of this broader solution where we conserve, we become more sustainable in all our ways, be more responsible with water, but ultimately the human race has to transform its relationship with water using all of the great minds in our planet working together.
And last but not least, we have today scheduled on the call as well, Mr. Henrique Miranda. Henrique is the founder of Better to Earth. It's a company based in Portugal, working with water purification methods, especially with also progressive new methods of purifying water and filtration of water, especially with contaminated substances.
Good afternoon to all of you. My name is Henrique Miranda. I live in Portugal, and I was taught on the management institutions that the cheapest resource is the one we don't use. Honestly, I don't believe in sustainability. I believe in sustainable development. That is a totally different concept, because if we talk about sustainability, most part of the time, we are only looking into the economic side of the businesses, but we have to realize once and for all that we created a situation where we live in. I don't know if we have time to recover from it, but we can try. There are increasing evidences that the health of our planet is declining at a rate never seen in human history, putting the global economy at risk. This is something that it's indisputable. Climate change, which translates into alternating periods of drought and floods, and contaminations of the oceans with chemicals resulting from human activities are just part of this equation. FAO prediction for population growth to 2050 will create an enormous political pressure on farmers at the same time to reduce the consumption of water and fertilizers, but also increase the volumes of food production. Faced with these challenges, and because we care about the future of the earth and the conservation of its resources, we know how important it is to reconcile this with the economic sustainability of agriculture businesses. We know that from all of the water on the planet, less than 1% is fresh water. The most part of it is held on ice caps and glaciers, so only a fraction of it is available, around 0.007%. Agricultural activities are responsible for the consumption of more than 67% of total availability. So it is imperative to do something with impact, and that impact will have to start on agriculture as the major consumer. Our contribution to the mitigation of these effects and to companies in addressing these constraints is given through a technology called porous alpha. With this technology, it is possible to optimize operating costs by reducing the use of water and fertilizers, but at the same time, still increase the yield of crops and the sustainable preservation of biodiversity. The effect of porous alpha can be compared to that of a sponge. Mixed with the soil, it retains water and diluted nutrients in it, allowing plants to use these resources in an organic way. Without efficient water management, agriculture is not an economically and environmentally sustainable activity. Let's take an example. Morocco. Morocco is the fourth largest tomato producer in the world, where water is collected more and more at greater depths, representing more than 15% of production costs. We have multiple applications of this technology all over the world, and these applications can extend from agriculture to water biofiltration and air biofiltration as well. To implement our strategy, we have a group of 5 companies with operations in North America and South America being carried out directly by the Japanese company. The synergies in water management are boosting other projects in other areas. And as we speak, 2 more patents are on the way and more will come. Betterworth is participating in multiple projects worldwide. Our colleagues from other regions are also performing pilots related to specific needs. I would like to leave you with some takeaways. Water scarcity is already the direct cause of conflict and migratory movements. In 2050, there will be over 140 million climate migrants. In Portugal, my country, it is estimated that the southern part of the country will lose 50% of available water in the next decade. In the last 2 decades, the water availability was reduced by 20%. In December 2021, 66% of surface water reservoirs are below their average value, and this here is even worse, including the ones that feed the largest populated area, such as the capital, Lisbon, and Algarve, one of the most important touristic regions in the country all year around. Also, water contamination with pesticides and other chemicals should be a major concern to all of us. So we are not only protecting the planet, but human lives as well. Thank you for your attention and available to comments.
Thank you so much, Henrique, for the valuable presentation and insights on your solution. So with this, I would jump into the Q&A part of the session. So let's start. Rudy, are you okay? Are you available? Are you with us?
Yes, hello.
Wonderful, wonderful. So let's go ahead. So in terms of sustainable approach and water management in Australia, you mentioned you were focusing especially in your, also based on your papers, on your previous work on revegetation and monitoring. Now, when we talk about Australia and managing water supply currently and in the future, if you have, of course, the insights that you can share with us on this. What is the set of measures that Australia is using to manage their water supply or to prepare for changing conditions under climate or global warming? And if you can also, if you can share a priority on that, like what is the first most important element, etc., in 1 minute.
Thank you. Well, I guess, I mean, there's quite a variety between the difference between the arid inland rural towns compared to the large coastal city towns. So, for example, both Brisbane and Sydney are looking at increasing their storage capacity in their dams. Both those cities have very large dams. But they're looking at raising the height of those dams to try and increase the storages. Sydney also has a backup desalination capacity that's never been used in any serious manner. It was built during the previous large drought in early 2000s that was broken by floods, as often happens, I guess. But the bigger problem for Australia, I think, is the unknown impacts on the currently drier inland areas, which is also the large growing areas of Australia. So the inland wheat belt and growing areas have at this point no real solutions that are being looked at. There has been talk of being able to transfer water down some of the large river systems, but that has actually resulted in the Murray-Darling system, which is the largest system in Australia, is actually under severe stress. But luckily, again, in the last year and a half or 2 years, there's been quite a lot of rainfall. So that system at the moment is being replenished through natural processes. But in the longer term, there are very big concerns about how to deal with it. So I guess to summarize, the coastal strip of Australia is quite lucky in that, you know, a lot of the rainfalls are orographically driven, and they're not likely to be a scarcity of rainfall on the coast. But the inland situation is quite different and requires, I think, some major policy shifts. And a lot of that, I think, will result in pressure to revegetate bigger areas.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
I'll leave it at that.
Super. My apologies, and thank you so much for your points. Definitely noted. Let's move to Michael. Michael, if you are here with us still.
I certainly am.
Super. So you were talking also around, very visionary benefits and opportunities that we may have with, rediscovering our connection or perception of water or relation to water. So what is the biggest challenge from your perspective in aligning the strategy, having, a regional or global strategy on water? You mentioned you're writing a book. So what is like the challenge that you see over here, and also if you have ideas how to overcome it, of course.
Well, I'll keep it very non-technical. That way our audience can enjoy all parts of it. So another speaker, I think it was Mr. Kwast, mentioned virtual water. Something like 400 gallons of water for a 2 liter of Coca-Cola. In India, you can't make cola because there's not enough groundwater and you need water for food. So people can't see those connections, and we're very, very visual beings, right? So there's an old story. There's a house burning, and I'll draw a few analogies here on how to do this, how to get people to pay attention. Okay, so the house is on fire. This is called upaya. Upaya is a sort of skillful means technique. All it really means is that, you trick someone to do good. So the house is burning, no one pays attention, and you're like, I gotta get these people out of the house. So how do you get people to pay attention to water? You're like, look around us, where's the water go? You have to illustrate it in such a way that, you show the forests withering, you show fewer things on the shelves, and people are like, well, what's going on here? You ask the question, like, what's going on here? Why don't we have toilet paper? Why are the trees going brown? And then you show a comparison. You show like some beautiful thing elsewhere. Like, oh, look at that. That's like, Eden or some like lush thing somewhere. It's funny because I live in a area where there's actually like a little town called Eden near me. It's a neat place to live. So you show people and you say, look over there, look at that thing over there. And you show it to them like kids. And they're like, oh, that's exciting. And then you get them to follow you out and you're like, look around, look behind you. That was a problem. Now you know what the problem is. This is how we solve it. And here's all the tech details that you'll pay attention to right now because it matters. When it comes to another analogy I wish to make, burns are terrible. One of the key things about caring for burns, especially like really bad burns, like full body burns, and I don't want to get graphic, it's not polite, it's rude, I don't want to be rude, is dehydration. And when we dry out the skin of the earth, we're not doing very good things for this planet. We're risking dehydration. And one of the biggest things about the body is that, the body is a bioelectrical system. And people, I don't think, know about this, but scientists know about this. I mean, I know about it from my background in sort of like, applied geography. But there are electrical currents that flow through the earth that, help us to, regulate things like weather, etc. There's all sorts of research on it, telluric currents. So when you dry the skin of the earth out and you collapse all these aquifers that you can never refill, that plays a big role in the electrical regulation of the planet. So you might want to look into that too. So that's how you do it. You get people to pay attention. Look at me, I'm a weirdo, look at me. Go that way, look at that thing, look behind you. Oh, now solve the problem this way and we have bigger problems to deal with. So that's kind of how I would approach writing this little book for kids, because you know what? Like I said before, we all just want a good story first. We don't want to talk about the serious things all the time because it's scary. And I get it. Not everyone wants it all the time.
That's true. So if I hear you right, it's a shared vision. And also, I think these analogies and stories that you mentioned, the narrative, changing the narrative is very important. And which narrative you tell us and also the others, that's quite key for how we move forward. So with this, thank you so much, Michael, for being part of this discussion. Let's move to Steve.
Of course.
I'm ready.
Steve, wonderful to have you. So how easy, because you are bringing quite some, ease or relief for water stress countries and regions, apparently, which we see or experience already now. So how easy or difficult is it to implement such a device or facility, a site, depending on the size, of course, from Genesis systems? And how long does it take?
Yeah, well, we are in the process of commercializing right now. And the beautiful part of this invention is that the machine itself is very easy to build. Any manufacturing facility can build it. The magic is in the nanofluid. So it's our chemical engineers that create the mix of very common elements, and we call it an element. In fact, our liquid is called the element. And common fluids that are non-toxic. That's the magic. And then the way we process it through the machine. So any manufacturing facility anywhere on the planet can build these machines to any size they need for household units, for apartment buildings, hospitals, or for municipalities. So as quickly as we stand up a manufacturing facility in that country is as quickly as we can deliver these. The small ones only take a few weeks to build. The medium-sized ones take about a month, and the large ones take about a year, depending on how big it's going to be.
Excellent. And so when we talk about, generating water, it already evokes that we will need some energy to produce that. So how is it about, how does the system work? How can you source it?
Right. So with air conditioning, you need kind of high intensity energy. But the beautiful thing about the liquid to liquid is you can use low intensity energy. It is designed for solar power and geothermal cooling. I'm not talking geothermal heating, but cooling, meaning that you only go down about 3 or 4 feet and you're at 55 degrees. That gives you an efficiency quotient where solar panels can then run the machine. So we want this to be a machine you can put anywhere on the planet, and you don't need to have any standing water available. You don't have to have any power grid or source of electricity, and you can have abundant water for the life of the machine, which is 20 to 30 years is what we're building them to right now. So that's the good news. If you have a gas well where you're flaring gas, we can run it off that. If you have diesel generators, we can run this machine off the exhaust heat of that emergency generator, or we can run it off electricity if that's what you have. But we're building this for that tribal community in Central Africa that has no infrastructure, no transportation, and they're out of water. And we can bring one of these generators to them, and they have water.
Beautiful. Maybe a complementary question to that. Are there any limitations of operating or to operating such a device? I don't know, temperatures
Right.
that you need to be in a certain.
Yeah. So yeah, the beautiful thing is that, air conditioning does not work if there's low relative humidity. We are able to operate our machines down to 10% relative humidity, and our engineers are designing chemicals that are getting us even lower than that. So the promise is that we can, if there is any molecule of water in the air, we can pull it out. But yes, you're right. The more humidity that's in the air, the more water you can pull out of the air for the less energy. But we have different fluids that are optimized for cold climates and dry climates, and those that are optimized for wet climates and hot climates. So the bottom line is we call it water your way. You tell me where you live, you tell me how many liters a day you need, and what kind of energy you want to use: solar, geothermal, wind, flared gas, heat, waste heat energy, or electricity. And I can design you a Genesis systems for your needs.
Wonderful. Excellent. Thank you so much, C, for being in the discussion today and sharing, the solution which you bring with Genesis Water Systems on the market. So thanks a lot.
Thank you for pulling all this together. It's so important. And these were excellent comments by your guests. They really get it, and we need to solve this together.
Definitely with you. So last but not least, Henrique, if you would be still with us. Wonderful. So the last minute max, because we are already over time, and my apologies for that. Take the full responsibility for this. What is the application limitation of your solution for water purification?
There is basically no limitation. It's made out of recycled glass. It's a cradle-to-cradle product. Sponge, it works like a sponge in the soil, mixed with the soil, so close to the rooting zones of the trees. What it allows to do is to capture as much water as it can and nutrients, so the plant is always fed with water and nutrients. And by this way, we not only save economically the money that the farmers need to spend on irrigation and fertigation, but also we prevent the chemical components they still use to infiltrate into the ground aquifers. Yeah, there is no limitation in terms of geography. We have it applied in China, we have it applied in Australia, in Peru, in Morocco, in Senegal, South Africa, in Spain. So we have it applied everywhere for agriculture. And yeah, we are now tackling one other subject, that is the removal of phosphates from wastewater treatment plants. Because although it is a very important nutrient for the soil, the problem is that the concentration is huge due to these processes of treating wastewater, and it is the cause for many of the environmental problems we have right now.
Well, wonderful. So with this, I would say, maybe we're going to deep dive on some other session regarding water on this part of the solution. Thank you so much, Henrique, for being part and also sharing, what your solution is about and helping the world to, change the relationship, the access to water, and also solve the problems which we have connected to that. So thank you very much. With this, I would close the call, the discussion for today. Thank you very much to the speakers for your time, for everybody that is on the line with us. Again, thank you very much for your time. I wish you a very good rest of the day and see you on the next Frogeex Green Tech Talk.